We're going to shift to some international issues here. Jim Carafano, he's the director of the Douglas and Sarah Allison Center for Foreign Policy Studies and also the deputy director of the Catherine and Shelby Cullum Davis Institute for International Studies at the Heritage Foundation. Mr. Carafano, if you don't mind, next time I reset and introduce you, I'm just going to say James Carafano of the Heritage Foundation. Because
that'd be okay.
That's the longest title I've ever heard in my entire life.
Yeah. Do we have time for an interview?
And thank you for joining us, James Carafano of the Heritage Foundation. Coming up next, we've got we do have time, and we need to because the Russian flags are flying high over the Crimean Peninsula, and it looks as though we heard Robert Gates, former defense secretary, say over the weekend that it's done. There's no way Russia is ever getting out. Do you agree?
I do, but I think there's a difference between what Gates and people like Henry Kissinger have said, which is basically just write off the Crimea and making Putin pay a price for this. And I wouldn't write off never getting the Crimea back. It's certainly in the short term, that's not in the cards.
And what does that mean? I mean, what are the dangers of not making Vladimir Putin pay a price, and how can we make Vladimir Putin pay a price?
Well, look, Putin is an unreconstructed Stalinist. I mean, his goal is to essentially recreate the old Soviet concept that you want to control all the countries on your border, and you want to control their politics, their security, and their economy. And then essentially you want to build, a self-contained economy where you like an empire. And the problem is Europe's essentially been enabling this because they do $500 billion of trade with Russia. Most of it's on energy. So they've got this dependence relationship. And as long as that persists, the problems will persist. And here's the deal. The next country he goes after might be a NATO member. Well, what happens then? I don't think we want to go there. And so you gotta start pushing back now, or this is going to get to a really, really ugly place.
Jim, can I ask you a question? Over the weekend at CPAC, we saw the sort of internal tension within even the conservative movement about, the Rand Paul isolationists versus people who are more pro-defense and stronger military. But I think that one thing that we would all unify around is that all of our foreign policy should be determined through the lens of our protecting our national sovereignty. You keep hearing, or we keep hearing, Crimea in the news. How does that directly impact our national sovereignty? Because the average person, I don't think, can understand. Well, I take that back. I'm not saying the average person is dumb. The average person, when you hear these terms thrown around on the news, isn't able to relate to it and understand how I'm in the grocery store. Why do I care about Crimea River? Why do I care? Can you explain a little bit about that, how this is very serious and why everyday Americans should care and how it might affect their daily life?
Right. And that is that is a great question. And quite honestly, the Crimea isn't a vital interest for the United States, and neither was Syria. So we don't care about them to the extent that this is something where we put U.S. troops or U.S. direct interests on the line. On the other hand, we do care about places like Syria because if it spins out of control, you get a regional war, and we're going to get pulled into that. And what we do care about is our relationship with Russia. Look, Russia is a lousy country. I mean, if it wasn't for energy, they would be collapsing. Half of them are alcoholics. I mean, the country's half empty, and it's going to fall apart, and Putin's a horrible leader. But ignoring Russia and letting them, in a sense, have this aggressive foreign policy is going to lead someday to a confrontation in Western Europe that the United States is going to get dragged into. So this is not behavior that we need to encourage. That's the interest that we really have there.
Sounded like you were describing Baltimore for a minute there. Our guest is Jim Carafano of the Heritage Foundation. Let's fast forward for a minute. I mean, that you laid out there that the worry is the next step, and whether we concede this idea that it is in Russia's interest to protect Russian-speaking people. That is a very dangerous proposition. I read a piece this weekend suggesting that Kazakhstan is next, that because there are people speaking Russian in Kazakhstan, then Putin will roll in there. What can we as a nation and with our allies do to draw this line very firm now?
I'm a little worried about our president drawing red lines. Well, first of all, Kazakhstan's gone. I mean, the Russians really, for all intents and purposes, already control Kazakhstan. I think the great danger is they'll turn back to Georgia, or they'll turn to one of the other Baltic states, and then they are in NATO. So I think that's the real issue for the United States. And what we should be doing is kind of what we should have been doing all along. First of all, the Russian reset was dead before it started. It was a stupid idea, and we ought to acknowledge it's a stupid idea, and the Russians are never going to work with us on anything. So we ought to just jettison that. The other thing is we ought to be flooding Europe with energy. I mean, we should have a free market, pro-energy policy, and we should have been exporting LNG to liquefied natural gas to Europe years ago. And the third thing is we got to quit pretending that we can pivot to Asia and not worry about any of our vital interests. Last year they had a major NATO the major NATO exercise in Europe, the number one exercise. The United States sent 100 troops. Estonia, which is about the size of Baltimore, sent more troops.
Wow.
We got to stop stuff like that.
I have a very serious question. You're at South by Southwest, right?
I am.
How's that going?
Yeah.
Natural transition, huh?
It's not fair.
Natural segue.
Me, Edward Snowden, Julian Assange, and Glenn Greenwald.
Are you there?
So Julian and Edward apparently couldn't come in person because they're criminals and they're under indictment. I came by video.
Well, we want a full report of that. It's not fair that we went to CPAC and you get to go down to Austin. James Carafano, Heritage Foundation, thanks for joining us.